Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Colin, thank you for coming along. To start with, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the great work that you do.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So the name's Colin Smith and affectionately known as the listener. And usually when I offer that as a name, people go, "What? What's all that about?" And so I asked them a very simple question, which is, when was the last time you felt really heard? And that usually stops most people in their tracks, because it's quite often a long time before they do. And then they say, "But so when I was last, but isn't listening and hearing the same thing?" And so I then able to explain to them the difference between listening and listening and hearing. And so when I look at the business that I have, which is under the umbrella of Dexterity Solutions, and there's three parts of it. One is that people need to feel heard, need to feel valued, need to know that they matter. So I listen. And the second is, and it's something we can all do, is the quality of my listening will improve the quality of your thinking. And everything happens because of a thought. So the more we can get in touch with our own thinking and explore that further, then that makes a difference. And in fact, if you were to say, when somebody has been talking to you, there's a pause and you ask them, "And what more?" You'll notice that they smile and they're delighted to carry on, because it's rare for people to be that interested in them. So that's the second area. And then the third area is actually teaching people to listen. Once they realize there is a difference between hearing and listening, they go, "Well, tell me a bit more about this listening thing so that I can actually build better relationships with my loved ones," which is the most important, but also at work with my colleagues and my customers, suppliers, because it does make a difference. So my overall aim under all of this is, how do I turn that listening dial up just a little? Not necessarily one person 100% better, 100 people 1% better. We'd see a marked shift in everything that's going on. And yeah, please find me. The website is www.dexteritysolutions.co.uk.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
So already there's a connection here, because I was talking to somebody the other day about how I believe that ValuesJam actually is helping people to practice this. And we live in a world where there seems to be a lot of focus on helping people to get their message across and, convey something, but very little in the way of educating people and helping them to practice receiving and listening well. So after this session, I'll be really interested to get that professional perspective from a listening point of view. So the way that we're going to do today is, here's the ValuesJam card deck, and I'm going to tip out some of the cards, and then how many piles would you like me to put in front of?
4 piles.
4 piles, okay. And they will be of different sizes. And so I've got pile 1 on my left and pile 4 on my right. So which number pile would you like me to choose?
Number 2.
Number 2, okay. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 cards here. So a number between 1 and 8.
5.
5. Ooh, now this will be an interesting one, I hope.
Forgiveness. Wow. Okay. Beautiful.
Okay, so the first question is this: what does forgiveness mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Ooh. Okay, perhaps if I can illustrate my thoughts with a story, which is the moment that came up, this was the story that came to mind. And in 1986, I think it was, during the Conservative Party conference in Brighton, a bomb went off.
Yeah.
And it was the responsibility of the IRA for planting that bomb. And one of the people who were killed was an MP called Sir Anthony Berry, the father of a friend of mine called Jo Berry. And at the time, she was a 19-year-old, bit of a hippie outlook, and obviously devastated by what had happened. But she said, I was determined to make something out of it, make something rewarding happen out of it. And so she wrote to Patrick McGee, the IRA bomber who was responsible, the only one ever to be made responsible for it. And she wrote a number of times and nothing ever came back. And after he was released in 2000, I don't know the exact circumstances, but she got a letter from him and said, I'd be happy to meet you. So they arranged to meet at a friend of Joe's house in Belfast, and Patrick came along. And the two of them sat in a room together. And she listened to Patrick justifying why he did what he did. And even he says this. He said about an hour and a half in, Joe said, and something along these words. Patrick, you know, if I'd had the life you've lived, it's entirely possible I would have done what you did. And he said, she completely disarmed me with her empathy. And the story goes on is that the two of them have spent probably the last, 15 to 20 years traveling around the world, working together with peace and reconciliation. And they often have disparate groups of people, so Israelis, Palestinians who've lost loved ones, in the same room together, listening to these two people talking about their story and then hugging each other because they've lost loved ones. And that's what unites them. And the reason for sharing it is that there's a part of me thinks, well, how has Jo been able to forgive Patrick? And what she says is that actually there is nothing to forgive now. She's gone past that, the forgiving bit. There is nothing to forgive. This is the relationship that they have. So for me, the opportunity to forgive is often for the person themselves, not for the other person.
Yeah.
And the danger is that if you've had something traumatic happen in your life and it's been perpetrated by someone else, if you don't forgive them, you will cold and harden yourself. And so part of it, even you don't have to tell the other person, but if you can shift that energy in terms of actually, yeah, I forgive them, because I don't know what the circumstances are that led them to do what they did. But as Joe said, if I'd had that life, it's entirely possible I may have done the same thing. Yeah. So the opportunity for us is to liberate ourselves, because that person has done what they've done, and it can be helpful to them to know they've been forgiven. And in fact, it's a huge heart thing to forgive another person. But the starting point is that forgiving others enables us to continue to live our lives more fully, I believe. So what does it sound and feel like? Great question. So it feels much deeper than perhaps we give it credit for. I think it's something that lack of forgiveness will consume us. Forgiveness will free us. And it's something that I think we need to take a lot more seriously than we do. In the fact that, you know, let's just be really radical and think about politicians. Should we forgive them for what they've done? Now, would I like to be in charge of running the country? No. It's a tough ask. And So if we can forgive them, it also frees our thinking to be less judgmental and less, um, I suppose, less arrogant. There's a humbling a moment for me as I think about forgiveness. It's like I can forgive. I can forgive. Yeah, that's my first thoughts.
Wow, what a start. Thank you for sharing, and a brilliant story. And when you were telling the story, actually, I found myself asking the question, but has she forgiven? Because until you said that, that she had moved on, I wasn't sure. And I was asking myself, even though you'd been through that process, were you able to forgive? There's a few things that have come out of this for me. Let's just deal with the metaphor first, and then go on to a couple of other things. You mentioned liberation. I sense a feeling of freedom, peace, losing the baggage. All of that weight gone, which is a good feeling.
Yeah.
And what does it look like? I've got a picture of a whimsical smile somehow. So it's not a happy smile, but I'm pleased with the situation smile kind of thing.
Yes, like that.
There's one thing that I wanted to maybe explore with you a bit further in this, because as you were talking about forgiveness, I started to wonder about the difference between the act of forgiveness and what I can only think of as the sense or the emotion of forgiveness, which strike me as being somewhat different. And you used the word arrogance, and another word that came through for me when I was thinking about what you were saying was that forgiveness in some contexts I find quite condescending. I forgive you. Well, really? Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
it's what you were saying about um, things have happened. That's the reality of it. And then we put our own frame and judgment on it. But ultimately, that's our choice. And not in all cases, but it does strike me that forgiveness, unless you take care and are humble about it, it is at risk of veering into that condescending hierarchical space, which doesn't feel very good, actually. And then finally, politicians. This has touched a nerve for me, actually, because I'm I'm generally generally non-judgmental. However, with the behavior of senior politicians in this country during the pandemic and since, I have been enraged, actually. And the reason why is not because of their behavior, but it is because of their role in society as a leader, and then them blatantly flouting the rules and regulations that they have been responsible for creating, on the basis that it seems they're different to everybody else. And that infuriates me. And I can't do anything about it. And I feel a bit sad about that, actually, because I don't want them to have that effect on me. But it does. I said finally just now, but there is there is another one. So you mentioned terrorism during your opening, and it reminded me of my attitude to terrorism, which I've had since I was a teenager, actually. And I've always, a bit like your friend, like Patrick, if she had had that upbringing, then she might well have taken the same action. Terrorists in some situations simply believe in something so much that they're willing to act in an extreme way. And who's to say whether that's right or wrong? And then the very final thing is that my comparison with terrorism is people who leave litter when they go out on. And actually, I feel a greater sense of compassion for a terrorist who actually strongly believes in something and then consciously decides to take action in alignment with what they believe in than somebody who goes to a park and then just leaves a load of litter mindlessly. And I think that in some ways is more culpable, actually, which it sounds bizarre. But
Yeah.
you know. So what do you think of that?
Oh my goodness. Um, yeah, I'm so with you with the litter bit. Definitely 100%. And you just look at it and you just go, who who left this?
Yeah.
And there's also something I learned from a book. I think it's Everything You Learned in Kindergarten. Something like everything you need in life you learned at kindergarten. And one of them is clear up your own mess.
Yeah.
Right. And I happened to be traveling about 2 or 3 days ago from Dublin, and we're in the lounge, and you look around to try and find somewhere to sit, and there's a table with, or lots of tables with their stuff on. And it's like, okay, I don't know the exact circumstances for them. Did they get up and just walk out because they're in a rush? Or more likely is, I don't need to worry about this. There is someone going to clear up for me. Rather than, why not just, even if they just put it together separately, somewhere, or got a tray or took it back. Because I do that myself in the coffee shop. If I've used 2 or 3 things, I'll take them back, because it's about clearing up my own mess. And if I look after my own mess, and everyone does, we don't have a problem. Yeah, it's that. In fact, there's an organization called the International Development Goals, which is aligned to the UNESCO, the United Nations goals.
Yeah.
And they said that if we got rid of greed, selfishness, and apathy, right, we could solve all of the other goals, because they would just get solved. So we wouldn't have a litter problem if we weren't so selfish.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Absolutely. And
and
those people at the airport lounge, did you forgive them?
yeah, I just cleared it up, and so I went and tried to get a tray, because it's like, okay, I'll clear it up. And it's that, so for me, one of the key things, I get a little bit annoyed at the way people drive sometimes, particularly in London. But the reality is, I've no idea why they've done what they've done. Yeah, it's back to what you said about the terrorism. Yeah, is it good or bad? They have a belief. So the person who cuts me up may have a belief that if I don't get to the hospital in time,
Yeah.
I may not see my father who's dying, or the birth of my child. And as a good human being, I'd like to think I am. I'd wish that, I'm glad they did that. And so we can offer that forgiveness for them. And it also, so rather than being stuck in that rage and all that, it's like, yeah, I forgive you. It's okay. It's okay. And therefore I can be back to my normal self, and my partner's much happier because I'm my normal self, not shouting at them.
What is it about the driving environment that makes us like that? I'm a bit like you. So and there are a number of things that you've already said. So for instance, in the cafe, or if I go to a pub, I always take the glasses back to the bar just to save the other person having to do it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But with driving, confession time. There's I live on a hill, and you give right of way to the person coming up the hill.
Yep.
So if people don't do that, I, I kind of just wave politely, to encourage them to. Anyway, shouldn't do that. Going back to forgiveness and people behaving in a certain way, it is this thing, isn't it, about asking a question? Well, I wonder why they did that, rather than
Yeah.
blaming
Yeah.
them for doing it. And I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is a story out of Stephen Covey's Seven Habits book, where there's a guy on a train reading a newspaper. And I think it's another guy with a young child gets on the train. And the guy sits down, and the child is just running up and down the train, creating havoc.
Right.
And eventually, the guy reading the newspaper puts his newspaper down and says to the guy opposite, "Can't you control your child?" And the guy opposite looks at him and says, "I'm really sorry. We've just come from the hospital and my son's mother died." Really, really powerful in terms of,
Yeah.
not making assumptions about why people are behaving in a particular way, and just having some understanding of what might be going on. And that, of course, that's not to say that some behavior is not unacceptable. It's not to say that it's not inexcusable, but sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah. Very true, and such a powerful story. Yeah.
Mm. So let's move on to another question. So when have you experienced forgiveness? So this could be either giving or receiving.
Okay. So one of the things that happens to a lot of us over Zoom is that you show up and the other person doesn't.
Oh,
All right, it's on the hour. So how long am I got to wait? Maybe a minute or 2 or 3, 4 minutes, and then I'll usually go back and check to make sure that I've not made a mistake.
you're referring
And
to our last meeting.
I wouldn't say that. I had one yesterday, and so I did my little note. I said I hope everything's okay. I have a speaking now. Happy to reschedule, and didn't hear from him for about 2.5, 3 hours. Oh, anyway, then I got a note saying, "Ever sorry, did I miss the email?" And I thought, hang on a minute. I think we agreed this time last time. And then I went back through some of the message, and it was like, oh, what happened is that we'd put the date in ahead, which was about a month and a half, and then both of us agreed when we spoke that actually it needs to be sooner. So we'd rearranged it, but I'd not crossed it out my diary.
Okay.
Right. However, there was a good turn in it, in that he was explaining to me some of the challenges that he's been facing. So it gives us a chance to now speak tomorrow. But it was my mistake. But if I'd got stressy about it,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was offering that, forgiving him for being late or not turning up when in fact it was my fault, but asking him if he was okay, if everything was okay. Because, as we've said many times today, we just don't know what the situation is.
Mm.
So I'm trying to think, have I been forgiven? Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking there's many occasions when I've said things that are not particularly clever, and apologized for it. But I think part of it is about owning our own stuff in that. And in fact, I've just done a recent blog post on it, where I was walking with someone, and we were chatting, and she said she's off in about 2 or 3 weeks' time somewhere, but she's only able to take a carry-on bag, not a case, a bag, a little, yeah. And quick as a flash, as you do, without giving any thought to what I was saying, well, why don't you just call the airline? Right? And we carried on, and she was very kind, and then I just, as we sat having a coffee, I said, what on earth was I thinking? Right? Who the heck did I, if it was that simple, it's like me talking to you. If it's that simple, Alan, you would have rung the airline, particularly when in this case, she's she's traveled far more than I have, traveled to some very obscure countries, far more than I have, and traveled on her own. So I kind of figure, actually, so what am I doing? But she was kind enough to forgive me. She said, because I know you and because I know it was with good intent, it was fine. But had it been someone I didn't know, I would think they were mansplaining, as she described it. And it was like, we're all guilty of that. And how many of these things go on that we are forgiven for without them uttering the words? So what I'm thinking then is there is the act of forgiveness, the I forgive you, which, as you rightly said, can sound awfully condescending. Yes, I have the power to forgive you, you know. But it's the actions that show you that I've forgiven you. And maybe that's the really important bit. And going back to the question you sort of asked about Jo, there are times when she really doesn't like Patrick.
Yeah.
You know, she is still angry,
Yeah.
but she knows what to do, and she'll go to a favorite place and she'll throw rocks or stones into the water. That's the way she deals with it. But they're able to have a really good relationship, and he still says, I killed Jo's father. That's it. He doesn't try and duck away from the issue at all. And
Wow.
even when they're together, he sits quietly. He doesn't, I'm the showman or anything, neither does Jo, but she will come and talk to people. And then when it's time to have the conversation, he then comes up. So he's not trying to have the fame for it, but he can share his part of it to help show that connection. And so I think she has. It's
incredibly impressive. You know, despite the fact that it's an horrendous act, what you've described in the way that he goes about himself is, I just have great respect for the man, actually.
Yes, I would agree. You know, and I've met him briefly, and I would agree he's very humble about it. He recognizes what happened. But as you said, you know, your view of terrorism is that, you know, they have a belief. And, you know, in the IRA or the Irish conflict, they were certain.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing this to us. We see a lot of these, digress slightly, but a lot of these Nigerian scams.
Yeah.
Right. But they believe that the West has taken from them.
And are they wrong?
Exactly. So it legitimizes their scamming because we're trying to get some of our stuff back. I know that's generalizing, but I do agree with you there. But also, I do agree with you about the politicians. It's like, really? Their behavior. Yeah, and their acts, if you like. But anyway,
what I love about ValuesJam is the way that it resurfaces memories that have been either lost or hidden for some time. And you telling those stories about forgiveness reminded me of 3 that I'll share with you.
Beautiful.
So the first one, trying to think how old I was. I must have been around about 16 or 17. And my next door neighbor had a scooter. And we lived on a road that was reasonably flat. And then about 50 yards along the road, there was a right turn which went up a hill. So my friend said to me, do you want to have a go at riding my scooter? I'd never had a go before. And I hadn't actually learned to ride a bicycle either. We didn't have bicycles. So I accepted his offer and I started off at the top of the hill. And as I came to the bottom of the hill, I remembered seeing people on motorbikes where you leant to one side to go around a corner, not realizing that scooters don't do the same thing. And so I leant and the scooter went straight into the car at the bottom of the hill. So the bike was okay. The car was really badly scratched down the side. And I quickly went and told my mum. And she said, "So what are you going to do about it?" And I was like, "Well, what do you think?" And she said, "Well, you need to go and tell the guy." And
What?
I'm sure, well, I must have been 16 because else I wouldn't have been old enough to do this. But this, I remember saying on my own. And she said yes. So I went and
Wow.
knocked on the door, and the guy opened the door, and I told him what had happened. And he did look disappointed. But he said, "Thank you for coming to tell me, and I'll have to deal with it." And he never asked us to pay for it or anything like that.
Wow.
And so, whilst he didn't forgive me, I felt, and it's a bit like you were talking earlier about his actions made me understand that, as far as I was concerned, I had been forgiven. I've no idea whether he had the same feeling or not.
Yes.
So that's quite interesting. So that's one.
Yeah. And well done for your mum.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Good
Well,
lesson.
yeah. Definitely a good lesson. Um, then uh, the story that you told about the lady and the flight and phoning up the airline, there's something about forgiveness not having to be in the sense of "I forgive you," like we've discussed. So I received an email, this is not very long ago, about a month ago, and it was from a client. It was from somebody who I've never met in the finance office. And the email said, "Thank you so much for your invoice, which we will process as quickly as we can. You might like to check it. In the meantime, you might like to check it and send me the final version." And the VAT was miscalculated, but
Right.
they didn't have to say that. They just said, "Do you want to check it?" And I sent an email back saying, "That's the most gracious correction I've ever received. Thank you so much." And as I was sending the email, I just thought, kind of that person, but they didn't have to do that. They've got lots of other things. There's probably it's an office job, so you're processing
Yep.
lots of stuff, and to just retain that sense of humanity um, struck me
Beautiful.
strongly.
Yeah.
And then the last one. So the story here is that I was working on my industrial release from university for a year in a hotel, and we had a hotel accommodation block for the employee. And I developed a strong friendship with one of the assistant managers. And one night I got home after finishing work at probably just after midnight, and I noticed that his light was on at the bottom of his door. The light was coming through underneath the door.
Yeah.
So I just knocked, and he opened the door with a half a bottle of, well, a half empty bottle of whiskey in his hand,
Right.
obviously in a bad way. And I was like, so I went in and said, what's going on? And he explained that his girlfriend of 5 years, I think, had been killed in a road accident. And so I stayed with him. He finished the bottle of whiskey,
Wow.
and talked about nonsense and talked about some serious stuff too. Now, several weeks later, I found out that that wasn't actually true. His story about his girlfriend wasn't true.
Okay.
And I found it really difficult at the beginning because, why would you put somebody who you had a friendship with through that?
Yep.
But later I found out that he had really quite serious mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in that case, it was therefore very easy actually to forgive him. When I knew that he had this issue,
Yeah.
was like, well, I, why wouldn't you do something like that?
Yeah.
Um, so there, and thank you for surfacing those memories, because I haven't thought about each of those stories. Well, obviously the more recent one had only happened recently, but the other two
Yeah.
crossed my mind for some time, and I remember them fondly, actually, fondly.
Yeah. I got a sense, particularly with the last one, of a softening of heart when you realize actually, first of all, it's like, oh, and then okay. And in spite of what he did and put you through, there's the compassion, isn't it? It's the forgiveness, it's the empathy, it's the compassion. Um, but it's the actions then. So he would still know. I don't know if you're still friends with him, but he would know you're still a good friend if you are. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
we actually lost touch. He went to prison actually, um,
right.
so didn't keep in touch. But I think there's something coming back to what we've touched on a couple of times now, and that is that if forgiveness is given from a place of understanding the other person,
Hmm.
rather than it being a mechanism to overcome how you're feeling, then it's much better, and it won't be
Yes.
constant.
Yeah. I'm just thinking how you would have forgiven him for yourself, because actually, you're feeling bad. You've put me through this. How do you forgive yourself? Sorry, how do you have that feeling of forgiving him without really understanding him? Because he's kind of giving you the reason to do it. Um, because if he was just, well, I suppose as I play with it, as I'm trying to think it through, he would have to have some mental condition to have done what he did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the thought that comes to mind.
And
Um,
so where I'm moving actually towards is the importance of understanding in a situation where there might or might not be forgiveness, because it's only with that deep understanding that you're truly in a position, and actually it makes it so much easier to forgive. Hmm. Let's
yeah, I like that. I like that. And there's a piece in there which is about if we really listen to someone's story,
Yeah,
would we hold all of this baggage about them? And
yeah,
so, even though we don't use the words, would we forgive them? I mean, we're not saying that, but actually, as you were understanding your friend's condition, it all drops away. Whether it's forgiveness or whatever, it's actually, oh, right, now I understand.
well, how about this then? This maybe is too radical, but what about if I said to you, if there is a deep enough understanding, forgiveness becomes redundant?
I think that's where Joe's got to.
Mm,
It kind of makes sense then. It
yeah.
joins up beautifully.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And the story that you've helped me surface. I was probably in my mid 30s, a young, very green sales guy, and I'm selling to BT, British Telecom. It was technology, and the decision that morning I'd found didn't go our way. Not a huge order, probably, I don't know, a few thousand. And so I rang the guy who was responsible for it. And even though this is horrible thought, I basically told him he'd made the wrong decision. It's like, but like you were saying, he had the grace, the style, the whole thing. He said, "Could you just think about what you've just said?" And I did. And I went, ah, I'm really sorry. He said, that's all you need to say. Everything's fine. And it was, and again, the actions from then on was, okay,
Yeah.
I know it was a mistake. That's fine. I can work with that. But horrible moment. I'm so glad he did what he did.
Now, what about this then? So one of the questions on a ValuesJam card is an invitation to ask your own question. So could I invite you to ask your own question about forgiveness, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how?
I go with the thought that comes to mind straight away. Why does forgiveness matter?
Ooh. And are you asking yourself or are you asking me?
Well, it just come up in my head. I'm going to ask you first. My
Why
turn.
does forgiveness matter? Well, this is a bit weird actually, because I think it's in relation to what we just talked about. If there is enough understanding, I wonder if forgiveness does matter at all, actually, because
I like this. Carry on.
well,
Yeah.
I don't want somebody to forgive me. I want them to understand why I did what I did.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And is the so let's just process this in two. So it's yes, I understand why you did that. So let's take the guy with the car with the scratch down the side. Um, so understanding how did that happen? Well, I've never ridden a bike before. I didn't realize how to control it, and that's how it happened. Okay, so there was no malintent.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate. You don't have the capability to pay for it, so there's not really much point me going down that route. I might as well just focus on sorting it out and moving on because else I'm suffering. Then is there a need for the so I forgive you? In that, if I go back to the being there, he didn't forgive me, but I felt positive about his response. So I'm not so sure that him saying I forgive you would have made any difference actually.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's a little bit back to your point earlier about who is benefiting more from the act of forgiveness actually. You know, is it more important for the person giving it or the person receiving it? And I'm thinking that perhaps it's less important recipient, um, and in some cases it is more important for the person who is forgiving, but maybe that's not a positive situation actually, because the reason that they feel the need to forgive is ego based.
Interesting. Yeah.
So to answer your own question,
Yeah.
it's your answer.
I love how you reframed that, in that is this, well, two things. One is this part of the human condition? And the other is it depends. And so in different circumstances, yeah, that would work. In others, it won't. But the business of the human condition is that so much can be undone. Sorry, so much good can come from. And I know this is my area, but if we were to listen more,
Yeah.
we wouldn't need to forgive because we'd understand.
Yeah.
You know, and I've got a good friend of mine who's, you know, he's been a friend a long time. He's got mental health issues, and without going through all the circumstances, some things happened that weren't very clever on both sides, and so I've dealt with that. But the other bit is, well, is he still your friend? Yeah, because I understand his situation, like your friend, and so the human condition kind of gets in the way, and therefore is forgiveness a way, however we play with it, a way of helping us manage the journey of being human. You know, because it's that whole contrast, isn't it? Because in the land of 6 foot people, height wouldn't be an issue. We'd never talk about height. So everything was wonderful. It'd be pretty boring, wouldn't it? We need the dark and the light to understand and to embrace both sides, so that we can choose the middle ground, or the third way, they say. But it's if we only ever see one side, then we don't know any different. You know, so if we've just been brought up in an environment where we never have to worry about anything, then why are all these people worrying? I don't understand that. But the more I understand it, now I understand that I do have privilege. And it's only when we are able to see the contrast. Yeah. And so forgiveness is maybe a way of helping us get be able to understand people more. Because it kind of plays to what the way you described is, if we really understand each other more, would we need forgiveness?
And just building on that, there's also a risk, I think, that if you jump too quickly to forgiveness, there's a temptation for you not to understand. You know, so it's this: you did this bad thing. Oh, I forgive you.
Forgive you.
Let's move on. You're not really in a better place there. And
Agreed.
It might have been a quick fix, but it doesn't strike me as being very satisfactory.
Yeah. Because what pressure was I under? Did I feel under to forgive you? So let's say it might be that there is a subservient relationship. Oh, yes. Well, of course, no problem at all. I might be, let's say you referenced that when we didn't connect one time. Well, I'm desperate to be on his jams thing, so I'll forgive him. Right? Or, which is the case, it's like, this happens. It happens all the time. Yeah. And I didn't wake up, you don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to really piss this person off by not turning up. It's not like that. You know, 99.99% of us are that way. The odd 1%, then there's usually some really good reason about perhaps their mental health or something. But when you get the messages back and you think, gosh, I'm so glad I didn't get stressy with that person. And of course, it disrupts my day, isn't it? You know, so what I'm thinking is, you know, there's been a mistake you're in a restaurant, the food's turned up and it's not right. You can shout and scream about it, or get the manager over, or go and have a quiet word. And you're more likely to get a better outcome. You're less stressed, they're less upset. Why upset all the other people in the restaurant because you're having a little strop about something? And be kind, be forgiving, be kind, be thoughtful, be understanding about it. And it kind of, I suppose, if we just reduce that sort of pain level, angst level, is better for all of us, because it's tough enough. It's tough enough anyway.
Agreed. And the other thing that in those situations, and I don't want to belittle the importance of, you know, what might be happening, because sometimes it's a challenge to have this approach, but basically what has happened, and you can't actually affect that.
Yeah.
So rather than wasting energy in getting
Yes.
excited about it, you might as well put the energy into, well, what's best to do now? That's the only thing you can control. So
Yeah.
why would you do something different? I'm conscious of time, and we've got one question that we do need to deal with
Okay.
at the end. That is this. What are you encouraged to do differently about forgiveness as a result of our conversation?
I think what I'm going to take away from this is the answer that you gave to my question. Why does it matter? And it's first and foremost to be more aware, be more understanding of others, because we just don't know what's going on for them. And they often say, don't they? People say, my life is awful. And you go, okay, so let's just metaphorically put you and all your friends in a circle, and they've all got their metaphorical stuff in front of them. Do you want to have those? No, I think I have my own stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, so that's what I'm taking away, that reframing and be more understanding. Yeah, be more understanding.
And
Do you?
when do you think you might have the first opportunity to practice that?
It happens all the time with my wife.
Okay.
It's because we're in such close contact. It's those little moments when something happens, and it's, instead of my reacting to it, my response would be, what's happening? What's going on? Rather than getting a bit, I can't even think the right word, but a bit moody about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is closing the circle.
Yes. Please, can you edit that bit out? I don't want to hear this.
Will not be edited out.
Because the one I get, you call yourself the listener. Why don't you act like it then?
Well, Colin, the reason I said this is closing the circle is because right at the beginning of this conversation, and I'm just trying to think what it was specifically that you said, but I remember thinking, oh, that's like me. And now you're talking about what you're encouraged to do differently. What I had been going to say, and will still say, is that when my partner leaves the end of a cucumber on the side rather than putting it in the food waste, or whatever it is, these trivial little things, rather than get excited about them, which I sometimes do.
Excited. Yes.
I'm going to be asking the question, I wonder why that happened, and maybe on occasion try and find out why it happened as well.
Yeah. But also, and we are like each other in this, is love their foibles.
Yeah.
Right. Because somebody said, what was it, when their partner had passed, and they said, I hated his snoring, but I just love to hear it one more time.
Oh, that's lovely.
You know what I mean? It's that. And so all of those, in fact, I said to Molly about that. I said, I just love your little foibles. I know they annoy the life out of me at times, but I would miss them. And it's so true, because we're asking them, I think, to accept ours as well.
I think that is a beautiful way to end our Values Jam on forgiveness, Colin. So thank you very much for your time today.
And thank you for the opportunity. It's been fun.
Cheers.
Indeed.